Stefano, the floor is yours.
So thank you, Matteo. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having us with you today. Good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure for me to be with you today in these very interesting conferences. I've heard many interesting speeches. Today, I would like to talk about our cybersecurity experience in managing our European GNSS systems. You will see that many of the elements that have been already described by other speakers will be also in my presentation, because this is our daily life in managing the system, in operating the European GNSS systems. Of course, I cannot talk about classified details, so please forgive me about that. However, there is something that I want to share with you. And this is linked to the cybersecurity challenges that we face on a daily basis. Um, I'm convinced that here we have people who represent the future of the cybersecurity for the European space activities. And I think that only by sharing our challenges with you, you can support us to achieve our goals. So for those of you who are not much familiar with the European GNSS agency, with the GSA, I will give you a brief introduction about us. And I would also like to describe how the agency will transform into the European Agency for the Space Program later this year. And then I will focus a bit on the threat landscape, and then I will go into details on our experience, which is based on Galileo, the challenges that we face on a daily basis with respect to cybersecurity, and the way we are facing the challenges. So a bit about the European GNSS agency. The agency is ensuring the operations of the two European GNSS systems, both Galileo and EGNOS, and is in charge of providing services through these systems. We care about users. There are more than 1 billion users using Galileo, for example, and that is one of the mission of the agency, to reach out to users, to develop the market. Massimo said it before, space systems are becoming critical. Everybody are using space systems for navigation, for positioning. We have more than 1 billion users. We have to improve the security of the system. We have to protect them. And at the same time, we have to ensure the economy grows through the exploitation of this system. That's why we also develop applications and research and development also in the user segment. But this is not the only thing that the GSA does. We consider ourselves as the gatekeeper of security. In particular, the agency is in charge of many security activities, like the security accreditation, which I will describe a little ahead. And then the operation of the Galileo Security Monitoring Center, which is not only our SOC, but also a center who provides the services, in particular governmental service like the PRS. How does it work today? This is the current governance. We work in an EU framework. Of course, there is a political oversight given by the Council and European Parliament, but the program management is done by the European Commission. And the European Commission relies on the support of the two agencies, the European Space Agency on one hand, which is in charge of mainly the development contracts of the system, the deployment contracts, and then of the GSA, which is mainly in charge of the operations, and then a set of security activities. This is what it is today. However, like I said, the agency is supposed to transform into the European Agency for the Space Program. The European Union has decided to set up a space program for the Union, and the current programs, the current flagship programs like Galileo, EGNOS, Copernicus, will become components of the global space program of the Union. That means that will be other components that will add up to the picture, like the EU GovSatcom system for satellite communication and for governmental satellite communication, SSA and SST, and also other initiatives that you might have heard of, like the Secure Connectivity Initiative, Quantum Computing Initiative that the Union would like to introduce later on into the space program. And the agency will be called to work also on those other programs, because these program or components, as they will be called, are critical systems, will become critical system for the Union, and they have to be protected. Massimo said it very clearly. Space systems have to be protected, especially if they deliver critical service, governmental services. And this is what we do today at the GSA, in particular for what concerns the security. This is why the agency is involved also, and is going to be involved in the other components. Today, the GSA is responsible for making sure that EU GNSS services are secure. And in order to do this, Massimo said it clearly, security is a process. The agency covers all the phases of the security process. We start from the implementation, definition of the security requirements. We have to make sure that the system operations and the provisions of the services are secure, and we make sure that the security governance, the policies, the requirements, and the standards are implemented properly in order to protect the services. This is where cybersecurity kicks in. This is where we take care of all the security aspects at engineering level for the services. Today, we focus mainly on Galileo and the GNSS and EGNOS, but we are also expanding this context into other components of the space program. But this is not the only thing we do. We also operate the system, and we have our own security operations center, which is called Galileo Security Monitoring Center. This is an integral part of the Galileo system. It monitors in a dual configuration, in dual redundancy, 24/7 the system. It gets the security events, it gets the security alerts, and react accordingly. Today, the GSMC is monitoring the Galileo system directly, and the idea is to expand its role also towards the other component of the space program. But then, in order to close the loop for the security process, you have to have a security assurance process, and this is guaranteed by the Security Accreditation Board, which is a board established inside the agency. It is the sole security accreditation authority for the European GNSS systems. It acts independently. It is composed of security experts, representative of the member state, and today is focused on Galileo and EGNOS. But as soon as the GSA will transform into EUSPA, which is expected before summertime this year, the Security Accreditation Board expands immediately its scope to the new component of the EUSPA program. This accreditation assurance process is based on the security risk analysis, and this has also been mentioned before. The security risk assessment for a system which has to be protected is essential. And through this process, then you go back and you start the loop again, and you go back to the requirements. You go back to the security posture of the system, of the service, of the operations, in order to make sure that you are protecting correctly your assets. So what is the threat landscape we can identify for our system? We're talking about a space system, and like every space system, we can recognize clearly a ground segment and a space segment. However, we have to clearly understand that for critical systems like Galileo, those offering services to users, we have to realize that there is another important segment that we have to take care of, which is the user segment. So we have different segments with different peculiarities, and the threats that can affect each of these segments are different, of course. We have to take them all into account. And also we have to take into account that the threat environment, the threat landscape is evolving. For example, until some years ago, it was very easy to make a distinction between a physical attack and from a non-physical attack. The distinction between kinetic and non-kinetic was mediated by the military terminology. It was very easy to understand that the physical attack on a site could be an act of war, could happen, and the probability or the likelihood for this to happen to the space segment was considered very low. But today we know that anti-satellite technologies are there, and we have to take them into account. 10 days ago, for example, we had to do our first collision avoidance maneuver for one of the Galileo satellites. This was for us a new thing. It was not an attack. It was an inert upper stage of an old Ariane 4 rocket, which was launched 30 years ago, still there in orbit, still a threat for the system. And you can imagine that what would be the impact of such a threat. Also, we have to consider that all the threats can act simultaneously, and when an attacker really wants to attack your system, probably can also go for a hybrid type of attack. So in this case, for what concerns the threat landscape, we cannot forget also the electronic threat, because the connection between the ground and the space segment is provided by RF links with their peculiarities, but we shouldn't forget that the users receive the services through RF links as well from the satellites. So we have to take all this into account, and we have to think about this threat landscape when we think about Galileo, clearly. Galileo, we said it's a strategic system for Europe, is providing services, and I will insist on the services because this is the peculiarity of the systems that we are operating. It is active. There are more than 1 billion users, and it started to provide the so-called initial services in December 2016. Such a system providing worldwide positioning service, of course, has a certain complexity. And the complexity is, first of all, in the space segment, because Galileo is a constellation of satellites. Today we have 26 satellites in orbit. The first two were launched about 10 years ago, and we are going to launch 2 extra satellites this year. But this already gives you the dimension of the complexity of the space segment, which is complemented by the complexity of the ground segment, because controlling so many satellites and ensuring a service worldwide requires a number of ground stations, and those are located all over the world. They are deployed also in remote places, very remote places, which are not easy to reach, and these clearly gives a complexity to the overall picture. So what are the challenges in this context for us? First of all, we heard it already in other presentations. Security by design. Security by design, it's a concept that it's universally accepted today. However, you have to think that the first concept for Galileo was born more than 20 years ago. And I don't remember anybody talking about security by design more than 20 years ago. Indeed, the original concept of Galileo was focused on providing outstanding navigation performances. And indeed, Galileo reaches this objective very well with very, very good and optimal accuracy performances. But it's also true that the original concept was focused on this, and the security layer was put on top immediately after. Now security is integrated in it. However, if you go into the intimate details of the design from time to time, you can still see the heritage of that original concept. Another element is obsolescence, and I think this is a concept known by everybody. For what concerns a space system, of course, obsolescence has a degree of complexity on top of normal IT systems, because once in space, you cannot change the satellite technology clearly. And imagine that the satellites have been built with a lifetime of 10 to 12 years. So once you launch the satellite, you have to live with it for 10, 12 years. And then if you think that the design of the satellites was even completed 3 or 4 years before, you understand the technology that you have to live with. Sure, you can still uplink new software versions to the satellite, and this is true. However, when you have to deal with a constellation, you have specific constraints that you have to keep in mind, that you have to consider. You have many satellites to uplink. You have to provide new version to the full constellation. How can you do that? Of course, you cannot do it in one go. First of all, because doing in one go would mean that you would need to reach all the satellites with all the ground stations at the same time. And I mean, managing 26 satellites at the same time is not that easy. But even imagine that you had all these capabilities and you could really uplink to all the satellites at the same time, then you don't have to forget that you have to provide a service to the users. And by doing this in one go, of course, you would create immediately an unavailability of service to all the users. Also because uplinking a new software to the satellite is not something that you can do in few minutes, like an update of your mobile phone. This requires planning. You have to contact the satellite with the station, and then you have to uplink. Then you have to make sure that the satellite is still in good health, and then you have to test the satellite. And then when everything is green, you can turn on the services and the signals, but then until the service can be provided by that satellite, you have to wait for the convergence of the algorithm. So this takes time, and this means that you have to take care of the obsolescence with a very good plan, and probably you have to uplink to the satellites following a dedicated plan, which takes time. Then for what concerns the attack surface of such a system, you have a worldwide distribution of stations. They are deployed everywhere in the world at remote locations. Have you seen in the map? You have to protect all these sites, also because these sites can become also sources of attack, and you have to make sure that the sites which are so widely distributed cannot become point of entry to the system. And then another element that has been mentioned in other presentation, the supply chain. Here in this context, you have the space segment, you have the ground segment, you have the user segment, all of them with different technologies. And then for each segment, you have elements which are composed of components, and then you go down to items which are supplied by the different suppliers. Easily you go to a supply chain which is very deep, and you have to make sure that all your standards, your security standards, your cybersecurity standards have to be applied by all the suppliers. And this clearly is very complex because you also have to face with different technologies belonging to different segments. So how do we face these challenges? First of all, security by design in new generation of systems. We have learned from the past. Security by design is a concept today which is universally accepted. it's fundamental. It has been highlighted also by other speakers. We are including security by design for the new generation of the new system. For example, for Galileo second generation, we have introduced cybersecurity requirements also for the services that have to be delivered by Galileo second generation. But we have started to do the same also for the other components of the space program. We have started to do this also for GovSatcom, for example. Then for what concerns the monitoring capability, we improved the monitor capability of our security operations center. And we do this by activating cyber threat intelligence, by knowing your enemy. This is done in contact with the relevant authorities of the member state. Know your enemy, as was said in other presentation. So basically, yes, this is what we are trying to do. Our security monitoring center receives alerts from the CERT and in particular also from the EU CERT. Then for what concerns the worldwide distribution, of course, it has been mentioned before, it's very complex to work with such a wide attack surface. So how can you handle this? You have to distribute your efforts. And one of the way we are using to do this is to apply severe standards for critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructure doesn't mean only that our stations, the site hosting our stations, are considered as critical infrastructure, and therefore they have to provide a strong physical security. This also means that what's inside that infrastructure and the information that is handled inside that critical infrastructure has to be protected accordingly. And then finally, I think a big chunk of the measures that we have to put in place, and we put in place in order to face the challenges, is related to the security governance. The security governance needs to be agile in such a complex setup. You need to react quickly in case of a problem, in case of an attack. So you have to make sure that your supply chain is ready to react. You have to make sure that the right actor, which has hands on the system, is able to react at the right time. And this is done by also implementing a governance which gives clear responsibility to each and every layer of the supply chain. Responsibility that are related to the cybersecurity management, responsibility related to internal audits, penetration tests that have been highlighted also in other presentation, and everything is needed to keep the system protected also through a good vulnerability management process. This is how we face our challenges. We do this with our staff, with our operator, with our engineers, but most of all, we do it also with the support of other experts, companies and industries which are supporting us. And we will never reach our objective without this support. And I'm pretty sure that only with your support, we can make sure that the services we provide with our systems are secure, that with your support, we can link space to the user needs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stefano. Thanks a lot for your presentation. I have a couple of questions for you. Julien was giving us from the French Space Agency a little bit of an order of magnitude of the number of people involved in security operations, defense. Can you give us also on your side what is the size of security for Galileo in terms of people, budget, and how does this compare with other similar programs like GPS or Baidu, or if you have any benchmark from other worldwide organizations?
You asked a difficult question, Mathieu. On one hand, I cannot reveal all the numbers, but on the other hand, I have to say that security is now so embedded in the program, in the system development, in the system deployment, in the operations, and in the service provisions, that making a clear distinction between the people who are supporting the security aspects from the others who provide the operations, for example, or the deployment of the system is very complex. It's clear then this can be achieved only through a common efforts. Synergies are put in place from this point of view, and there are different actors working on it. You know that the European context is very complex in itself. This system and these services are very complex as well. So we have several actors working on them. On the security side as well, we have experts in the GSA. We have experts in the ESA, which is supporting us. We have experts from industries and experts from the operators.
Yeah.
How this compares to GPS, GLONASS, and Beidou, which are typical military systems, this is hard to say as well.
Okay, very well. Also, when I asked Massimo from ESA if ESA was subjected to attacks, he said every day. I guess Galileo is one of the most sensitive infrastructure in Europe. Can you maybe detail a bit more about the level of attacks that these critical infrastructures are subjected to?
But it would be silly to say that systems are not subject to attack. And of course, I can concur with Massimo that all the systems are basically victim of attacks also on a daily basis. We experience it at the GSA as well. It starts with like port scanning to phishing attacks and these type of things. So yes, we are subject to attacks on a daily basis, and of course, this is why we have to protect our systems.
Including state-sponsored attacks?
But it is something I cannot say.
Okay.
Mathieu.
Maybe one question from my side. Yesterday we had a very nice panel around the quantum technologies. Is the quantum threat something already integrated in your risk analysis? You have some mitigation for that, or is something too far?
This is a very good question because clearly quantum technologies are coming in play today. Not only because we want to exploit them in a new initiative, in a new system, but also they provide like new elements of attack to like the bad guys. So clearly, considering all the evolutions which are gradually happening in the quantum field, we take them into account as well.
Great.
Thank you.
Yes.
And I'll ask you also the same question to Massimo. Are you using public cloud services today, or are you planning to? What is your opinion on these?
But for the systems, the space systems like Galileo and EGNOS, for the moment we don't. Consider that these systems contain also and handle classified information, so this makes it for the cloud a bit complex to achieve, at least with the current regulations that we have and with the current technology. So for the moment, this is not something that we have in the plans for the space systems, for these space systems.
And maybe with the new initiative Gaia X, there are some changes in this kind of philosophy or this kind of regulation you have right now?
The regulations for the handling of classified information and classified items is, for the moment, quite rigid. Sometimes, like in the regulatory field, it's difficult to follow the technology. Most of the time, the regulators find themselves already outdated with respect to the pace of technology. This is something that we have to live with. And of course, like in the future, there will be for sure plans in updating the regulations as well, which would allow different solutions, because there will be also different solutions to protect the assets.
Thank you. A couple of questions from the chat. One of the participants is asking whether it would make sense to impose some security standards in order to prevent any collision or satellite hacking, not on the Galileo, but on other spacecraft, maybe orbiting in the vicinity of the Galileo satellites that could impact and deteriorate or interrupt the service. Would you be in favor of imposing sort of a regulation because other spacecraft can affect the Galileo service?
This is a very good question. I like it very much because this also allows me to mention how important it is to monitor what is out there in space, orbiting around and posing a threat to the system which are currently functional. And this is why the Union has understood that this is an essential need for the Union. That is why they have introduced the surveillance and tracking component in the space program, and this is going to be developed. This will give us an extra support in handling this type of event and potential collisions, for example. However, the question is very relevant because the introduction of standards will, of course, help everybody in the best management of the outer space. And I always am in favor of using standards because these make the life better for everyone.
Thank you. One last question from the chat is a recurring topic on the space market within the space community. It's about the integration and collaboration between ESA and other European institutions. You mentioned EUSPA as becoming a reality. How this will be unfolding and being implemented in the near future?
This is a good one, and I like it because Massimo knows it as well. We meet regularly also to discuss on how to work together, in particular in the security field. It is clear that the European space can be built only with cooperation among all the actors. The agencies have different competences and different missions. You see that the GSA in the future EU agency for the space program is focused mainly on the operations and on the service provision, whereas for the definition and the development of the system, we strongly rely with ESA. And at the same time, we have to work with the other institution of the European Union, in particular the European Commission, because managing these systems which are strategic for the Union can be done only when you have also a political oversight. So the institutions are working together. We meet regularly in order to also define how we will work in the future year, and Massimo knows that very well.
Great, thanks a lot for your answers. Time is up. We'll have to move on to the next panel discussion. Thank you so much, Stefano, for being with us today. Really appreciated your efforts in joining the first edition of CYSAT. I think this is what is making the event also attractive to the participants, is to have speakers like you. Thanks a lot again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefano. Bye-bye.
Bye.